The stone floor bit into her knees as they forced her down. "Kneel before his majesty," Lord Varen commanded, his boot pressing between her shoulder blades until her forehead nearly touched the ground. "Show the king what the Thornwood Pack offers as tribute." Laughter rippled through the court. Ilara kept her eyes fixed on the cold marble beneath her, counting the veins of silver that ran through the black stone. She'd learned long ago that looking up only invited worse treatment. This was her fate now. Tribute, a word that meant payment, meant debt settled, meant worthless girl finally put to use. Her uncle had smiled when he told her. Actually smiled, as if sending her to the Lycan king's court to serve as a kitchen slave, or worse, was a gift he was bestowing upon her. "You should be grateful," he'd said, gripping her chin hard enough to bruise. "You've been nothing but a burden since your parents died. At least now your existence will mean something. You'll pay off what your father owed, one way or another." She hadn't cried. She'd stopped crying years ago when she realized tears only made her aunt angrier. Instead, she'd packed her single worn dress and walked to the cart that would carry her across 3 territories to the Lycan king's domain. That had been 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks of travel, of sleeping in the back of a wagon with other tributes, servants, labourers, and 3 other young women whose hollow eyes matched her own. 2 weeks of wondering what kind of monster the Lycan king would be. The stories said he was ancient, 300 years old at least. They said he'd killed his own brother for the throne. They said he took what he wanted and discarded what he didn't, and that his court was full of broken things he'd grown bored of. Ilara had no illusions about what happened to broken things. "Majesty," Lord Varen announced, his voice dripping with false reverence. "The Thornwood Pack presents this Omega as settlement for their territorial debt. She is adequate for basic service." Another ripple of laughter. "Her bloodline is unremarkable, her wolf weak, but she can scrub floors well enough, I'm told." Omega. The word landed like a blow, even though she'd heard it her whole life. The lowest rank, the weakest wolf. In her uncle's pack, Omegas ate last, slept in the coldest rooms, and worked until their hands bled. She waited for the king's response. A dismissive grunt, perhaps, an order to take her to the kitchens. Or maybe he'd simply wave his hand and have her dragged away to whatever dark corner they stored unwanted tributes. The silence stretched and stretched. Ilara's shoulders began to ache from holding herself so still. Lord Varen's boot had lifted from her back, but she didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, descending from what must be the throne, coming closer. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The footsteps stopped directly in front of her. She could see boots now, fine black leather, polished to a mirror shine. The boots of a king. "Look at me." The voice was deep, not cruel exactly, but commanding in a way that made her wolf, her weak, pathetic Omega wolf, want to bare her throat in submission. She couldn't move. Terror had locked her muscles, frozen her in place. Looking up meant meeting his eyes, and meeting a king's eyes uninvited was... I said, "Look at me." Softer now, almost gentle. Slowly, trembling, Ilara raised her head. The Lycan king was not what she expected. He was tall, towering, really, with broad shoulders that blocked out the light from the windows behind his throne. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his face was hard carved, all sharp angles and shadows. But his eyes were gold, pure molten gold, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. His nostrils flared slightly and his jaw tightened. Then he turned to Lord Varron, and his voice went cold as winter steel. "You put her on her knees." It wasn't a question. Lord Varron shifted. "Majesty, she is tribute. An omega. It is customary." "I don't recall asking about custom." The king's tone could have frozen fire. "I asked why this woman is kneeling on a stone floor like a supplicant begging for scraps." The court had gone utterly silent. Ilara could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could sense the confusion radiating from every corner of the room. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was nothing. Less than nothing. Why would the king— "Stand." The word cut through her panic. She blinked up at him, certain she'd misheard. The king extended his hand toward her, his actual hand, reaching down to where she knelt on the floor like she was something worth lifting up. "Stand," he repeated, "beside me." "Majesty." Lord Varron's voice had gone thin with alarm. "Surely you don't mean she's an omega? She's meant for the kitchens or perhaps the laundry. She cannot stand beside—" "She can stand wherever I say she stands." The king hadn't taken his eyes off Ilara. His hand remained extended, patient, waiting. "And I say she stands beside me." Ilara's fingers shook as she reached up. His hand closed around hers, warm, steady, impossibly strong, and he pulled her to her feet as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. For a dizzying moment, she was close enough to catch his scent. Pine and smoke, and something wild, something that made her wolf stir in a way it never had before. He didn't release her hand. Instead, he turned to face the court, keeping her at his side, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the vast hall. "Let it be known," he said, "that this woman is under my protection. Anyone who harms her, insults her, or forces her to her knees again will answer to me personally." His golden eyes swept the room, and Ilara watched powerful nobles flinch beneath his gaze. "Am I understood?" A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. Lord Varron had gone pale. Ilara stood frozen, her hand still engulfed in the king's grip, her mind refusing to process what had just happened. She'd walked into this court expecting to be discarded. Instead, the most powerful Lycan in the realm had lifted her up and declared her protected. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. The king looked down at her then, and something in his hard expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You're safe now," he said quietly, low enough that only she could hear. "I know you don't believe it yet, but you will." Ilara opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? "Thank you." Why? "What do you want from me?" He seemed to read the questions in her eyes. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "Come," he said. "We have much to discuss. And you look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks." He was right. She hadn't. But as he led her away from the gawking court, his hand still holding hers like she was something precious rather than something disposable, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled into a story she didn't understand, and she had no idea what role she was supposed to play. The king's private chambers were nothing like she'd imagined. Ilara had expected cold opulence, gold and marble and sharp edges, the kind of wealth designed to intimidate. Instead, she found warmth, a fire crackling in a massive hearth, thick rugs covering the stone floors, bookshelves lining the walls, stuffed with volumes that looked actually read rather than decorative. He released her hand to pull out a chair at a small table near the fire. Sit. She sat. What else could she do? A servant appeared, an older woman with kind eyes who didn't look at Ilara with contempt or curiosity, just quiet efficiency. Within moments, the table was laden with food: roasted meat, fresh bread, butter, cheese, fruit. More food than Ilara had seen in months. Eat, the king said, settling into the chair across from her. We'll talk after. Ilara stared at the spread before her, her stomach cramped with hunger, but she couldn't make herself reach for anything. This was a test. It had to be a test. If she ate too much, too fast, too eagerly, he'd see how desperate she was. How pathetic. How. It's not poisoned. His voice was dry. And it's not a trick. You're hungry. The food is here. Eat. She looked up at him. Those golden eyes watched her with something that might have been patience or might have been pity. She couldn't tell which was worse. Slowly, she reached for a piece of bread. The first bite nearly made her weep. It was fresh, soft, still warm from the oven. In her uncle's house, she'd eaten scraps, stale crusts, burnt portions, whatever was left after everyone else had finished. She ate the entire piece in 4 bites, then froze, horrified at herself. But the king said nothing. He simply pushed the plate of meat closer to her and waited. By the time she finally stopped eating, she'd consumed more than she had in the past week combined. Her stomach ached, but it was a good ache. A full ache. She'd forgotten what that felt like. Better? He asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that unreadable expression. Now, I imagine you have questions? Questions. She had nothing but questions. They crowded her throat, fighting to get out. But the one that emerged surprised even her. Why? One word. It encompassed everything. The king's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked almost uncomfortable, a strange expression on a face that seemed carved for command. When you entered that hall, he said slowly, I caught your scent. Ilara blinked. Her scent. She'd been traveling for 2 weeks. She probably smelled like road dust and fear and unwashed clothes. What could possibly— You're my mate! The words hit her like a physical blow. Number. No, that wasn't possible. Fated mates were rare, sacred, the stuff of stories and songs, and they certainly didn't happen to worthless omegas from disgraced bloodlines. You're wrong. The words came out before she could stop them. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. You can't. I'm 342 years old. His voice remained steady, but something burned in his golden eyes. I've met thousands of women, princesses, warriors, nobles from every pack in the realm. I've waited my entire life to catch that scent. He paused. And then you walked in, covered in road dust, terrified, expecting to be thrown to the kitchens, and my wolf recognized you instantly. Ilara shook her head. This was wrong. This was some kind of mistake, some cruel joke. Any moment now he'd laugh and tell her the truth, that he wanted a servant or entertainment or whatever else powerful men wanted from powerless women. I don't believe you, she whispered. I know. He didn't seem offended. If anything, he seemed to expect it. That's why I'm not going to claim you tonight, or tomorrow, or next week. She went still. What? You've spent your whole life being told you're worthless. His voice was quiet now, stripped of its kingly command. Just a man, speaking plainly. One afternoon of kindness won't undo that, I understand. So here's what's going to happen. He stood and moved to a door on the far side of the room, opening it to reveal another chamber beyond. Ilara caught a glimpse of a massive bed, soft fabrics, moonlight streaming through tall windows. These will be your rooms, he said. Connected to mine, but private. The door locks from your side. You'll have clothes, books, whatever you need. You'll eat proper meals. You'll rest. You'll heal. Ilara rose from her chair on unsteady legs. And in return? The question hung between them. She knew how these arrangements worked. Nothing was free. There was always a price. The king turned to face her, and for a moment he looked almost sad. In return, he said, you let me prove to you that not every powerful man is a monster. You let me show you what it means to be valued. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, we'll talk about what comes next. And if I'm never ready? The words were barely audible, but he heard them. Of course he heard them. Lycan hearing missed nothing. Then you'll still have the rooms, the food, the safety. I won't force you into anything, Ilara. He said her name like it mattered, like she mattered. I've waited 3 centuries for my mate. I can wait longer. I can wait forever, if that's what you need. She didn't realize she was crying until she felt the tears on her cheeks. When had she started crying again? She'd trained herself not to cry. Tears were weakness, and weakness was punished. But here she stood, tears streaming down her face in front of the most powerful Lycan in the realm, and he wasn't angry. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. For one terrifying moment, she thought he might touch her, grab her, shake her, demand she stop being so pathetic. Instead, he simply offered her a handkerchief, clean white linen, monogrammed with a silver crown. Your uncle, he said quietly. Lord Varen mentioned the Thornwood pack. That's Marcus Thorne's territory. She flinched at the name. The king's expression darkened. He hurt you. It wasn't a question. She answered anyway. He said I was a burden. Her voice cracked. After my parents died, he took me in, but he never let me forget that I owed him, that I was worthless, that no one would ever want me. He was wrong. 3 words. Simple. Certain. Spoken like fact rather than comfort. Ilara looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. He stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could catch that scent of pine and smoke that made her wolf want to curl up and feel safe for the first time in years. You don't know me, she said. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. His golden eyes held hers. I know you survived. I know you walked into my court expecting cruelty and still held your head as high as you could. I know that despite everything they did to break you, you're still here, still fighting. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. That's not worthless, Ilara. That's strength. Something cracked inside her. Something she'd built up over years of hurt and hunger and being told she was nothing. It didn't break completely. Walls that thick didn't crumble in a single night. But a fracture appeared, a tiny sliver of light where there had only been darkness. She didn't trust it. She didn't trust him. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wanted to. The nightmare found her 3 nights later. She was back in her uncle's house, locked in the cellar where they put her when she misbehaved. The darkness pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating. She could hear footsteps above her, heavy boots on wooden floors, and her uncle's voice, muffled but unmistakable. Worthless. Burden. Should have drowned you when your parents died. She screamed, but no sound came out. She pounded on the door, but her fists made no impact. The walls were closing in, shrinking the space until she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't. Ilara! The voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Ilara, wake up. You're safe. You're here. You're safe. Her eyes flew open. The king knelt beside her bed, his face inches from hers. Moonlight spilled through the windows, casting silver across his features. His golden eyes were wide with concern, and his hands hovered near her shoulders without touching her. "There you are," he said softly. "You're all right. It was just a dream." She was shaking. Her nightgown was soaked with sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead. The remnants of the nightmare still clung to her. The smell of the cellar, the sound of her uncle's voice, the crushing weight of the darkness. "I'm sorry." The words came out hoarse, broken. "I didn't mean to wake you. I'm sorry, I'll be quiet, Stop." His voice was firm but gentle. "Don't apologize for having nightmares, and don't apologize for waking me. The door between our rooms isn't soundproofed for a reason." She blinked at him. "What?" "I wanted to hear if you needed me." He said it simply, as if it were obvious, as if kings routinely stayed awake listening for the nightmares of broken Omega girls. "Can I get you something? Water? Tea? A different room if this one—" "No." She shook her head quickly. "No, the room is fine. The room is perfect. I just—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish. How did she explain that the room was the nicest place she'd ever slept? That the nightmares had nothing to do with her surroundings and everything to do with years of darkness she couldn't escape? The king studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he sat back on his heels. "When I was young," he said, "before I became king, my father used to lock me in the Eastern Tower when I displeased him, sometimes for days. No food, no light, no company. He said it would make me stronger." Ilara stared at him. She couldn't imagine anyone treating this powerful, commanding man as something to be punished and discarded. "How old were you?" "Young enough that I still believed I deserved it." His jaw tightened. "It took me decades to understand that cruelty isn't discipline. It's just cruelty. And the people who inflict it are the broken ones, not their victims." Something shifted in Ilara's chest. For the first time, she saw past the crown and the power and the ancient, intimidating presence. She saw a boy locked in a tower, wondering what he'd done wrong. She saw someone who understood. "The cellar," she whispered. "My uncle used to lock me in the cellar." The king's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his golden eyes. Something dangerous. "How long?" "Days, sometimes. When I was little and still cried, it was worse. He said crying was weakness, and weakness had to be beaten out of me." She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I learned not to cry. I learned not to feel anything at all. It was easier that way." "Easier to survive," he said quietly. "Not easier to live." She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something inside her shift. 3 days ago, she'd been terrified of this man. She'd expected cruelty, expected demands, expected to be used and discarded like she'd always been. Instead, he'd given her beautiful rooms and more food than she could eat. He'd asked nothing of her except to rest and heal. He hadn't touched her beyond that single brush of his thumb across her cheek. And now, here he was, kneeling beside her bed in the middle of the night, sharing his own darkness to make her feel less alone in hers. "Why are you being so kind to me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. She'd asked versions of it before. Why did you help me? Why do you care? Why me? But this felt different. This felt like the real question underneath all the others. The king was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm and solid and impossibly gentle for hands that could tear a man apart. He didn't squeeze or pull or demand. He just held her, like her hand was something precious. "Because you deserve kindness," he said. "Because you've spent your entire life being treated like you're worthless, and I want you to know what it feels like to be treasured." His thumb traced a slow circle on the back of her hand. "And because you're my mate, Ilara, my wolf has waited 300 years for you. Now that you're here, there's nothing I wouldn't do to see you happy." Her heart stuttered in her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it frightened her. "I don't know how to be happy," she admitted. "I don't think I ever learned." "Then I'll teach you." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Soft, reverent, achingly tender. "If you'll let me." Ilara's breath caught. The touch of his lips against her skin sent warmth flooding through her, pooling low in her belly. Her wolf stirred, straining toward him like a flower reaching for sunlight. "Mate," something whispered in the back of her mind. Ours. She'd never felt her wolf like this before. It had always been weak, quiet, barely there at all. Her uncle had said it was because she was defective, an omega whose wolf was too pathetic to even manifest properly. But now, her wolf was awake, alert, wanting. "I don't understand," she breathed. "My wolf has never... I've never felt..." The king's eyes flared brighter, gold burning like molten metal. "Your wolf was never weak, Ilara. She was dormant, protecting herself, protecting you, waiting until it was safe to emerge." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "She recognizes me, just as my wolf recognizes you." He was close now, so close she could see the silver flecks in his golden eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. If she leaned forward just a few inches, she could. She pulled back. Not because she didn't want it. She did, with a desperation that terrified her, but because it was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. 3 days ago, she'd been a worthless tribute expecting to be thrown to the kitchens. She couldn't become a king's beloved overnight, no matter how much her wolf howled for it. The king let her retreat. He released her hand and sat back, putting space between them. "I'm sorry," she started, but he shook his head. "Don't be. I told you we'd go at your pace, and I meant it." He rose to his feet, and suddenly the kneeling man was a king again, tall, powerful, commanding. But his eyes remained soft. "Try to sleep. I'll be right through that door if you need me." He turned to leave, and before she could think better of it, she called out, "Kale." He stopped, turned. It was the first time she'd used his name instead of Your Majesty or the King, and they both knew it. "Thank you," she whispered, for everything." Something warm flickered across his hard features. Not quite a smile, but close. "Sleep well, Ilara. I'll see you in the morning." He disappeared through the door, and Ilara sank back against her pillows, her heart racing. She was in trouble. Deep, terrifying, wonderful trouble. Because somewhere between the nightmare and the story of the tower and the kiss pressed to her knuckles, she'd started to fall for him. The king. Her mate. The man who knelt beside her bed in the darkness and made her feel, for the first time in her life, like she might actually be worth something. She was falling, and she had no idea how to stop. She wasn't sure she wanted to. 1 week later, her uncle came for her. Ilara was in the library when she heard the commotion. Raised voices echoing through the stone corridors, the heavy tread of guards, and underneath it all, a voice that made her blood turn to ice. Marcus Thorne. She was on her feet before she realized she'd moved, her body responding to years of conditioning. That voice meant danger. That voice meant pain. That voice meant hide. Be small. Don't let him see you. But she wasn't in Thornwood anymore. She was in the king's castle, in the king's library, wearing a dress of deep blue silk that the king had given her. She was safe here. Wasn't she? The library doors burst open. Her uncle strode in like he owned the place, flanked by 2 of his men. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, broad, with cold grey eyes that had never held an ounce of warmth. Behind him, Lord Varon followed, looking distinctly uncomfortable. There she is. Marcus's lip curled as his gaze swept over her. Playing dress-up, I see. Did you actually think you could escape your debt by spreading your legs for the king? Ilara flinched. The words hit like blows, each one finding the soft places she thought she'd started to heal. Uncle. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. What are you doing here? Taking back what's mine. He stepped closer, and Ilara fought the urge to retreat. The tribute agreement was for a servant, not a royal whore. You've embarrassed me in front of the entire realm, and you're going to pay for it. She's not going anywhere. The voice came from the doorway, and Ilara's heart lurched. Kale stood in the entrance, filling the frame with his massive shoulders. His expression was carved from stone, but his eyes burned with a fury that made the air itself feel heavier. Behind him, a dozen royal guards waited in formation. Marcus turned, and to his credit, he didn't flinch. Your Majesty, I've come to reclaim my property. Your property. Kale's voice was dangerously soft. The girl. She was sent as tribute to settle a debt for kitchen service, not... He gestured dismissively at Ilara's silk dress. Whatever this is, I demand she be returned to fulfill her original purpose. You demand? Kyle stepped into the room, each footfall deliberate. You come into my castle, call my mate a whore, and you demand. Marcus's face went pale, then red. Your mate? That's impossible. She's an omega, a weak, worthless... Choose your next words very carefully. Kyle had stopped moving. He stood between Ilara and her uncle now, a wall of muscle and barely contained violence. Because if you finish that sentence, I will tear out your throat and send your body back to Thornwood in pieces. The room went silent. Ilara couldn't breathe. She'd never seen Kale like this. The patient, gentle man who knelt beside her bed, replaced by something ancient and deadly. This was the Lycan king the stories warned about. This was the monster who had killed his own brother for the throne. And he was defending her. Marcus recovered first, though his voice had lost its confidence. You can't keep her. The tribute agreement is fulfilled. Cuttill cut him off. The Thornwood pack owed a debt. They sent tribute. I accepted it. The debt is settled. But she was meant to be a servant, not... I don't care what she was meant to be. Cale's eyes never left Marcus. She's mine now, and I protect what's mine. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Marcus's gaze slid past Cale to find Ilara, and something ugly twisted in his expression. Is this what you want, girl? To be some king's plaything until he tires of you? His voice dripped with venom. Because he will tire of you. Everyone does. You're nothing special, just a broken little Omega who got lucky. When he's done with you, when he sees what you really are, he'll throw you away like the garbage you've always been. The words sank into her like poison, finding every crack in her armor. Part of her, the part that had spent years believing she was worthless, wanted to agree, wanted to bow her head and accept that this was too good to be true, that she didn't deserve happiness, that eventually Cale would realize his mistake. But another part of her, a new part, a stronger part, was angry. She'd spent her entire life being told she was nothing. She'd been starved and beaten and locked in cellars and sent away like trash. She'd accepted it all because she'd had no choice. Now she had a choice. No. The word came out stronger than she expected. Marcus blinked. What? I said no. Ilara stepped forward, moving to stand beside Cale rather than behind him. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. I'm not going back with you. I'm not your property. I never was. You ungrateful little... I'm not finished. She cut him off, and the shock on his face was almost worth the terror clawing at her chest. You took me in when my parents died, and you made me pay for it every single day. You told me I was worthless, that no one would ever want me, that I should be grateful for scraps and silence. And I believed you. For years, I believed you. She took another step forward. Cale moved with her, a silent presence at her side. But I was wrong to believe you, and you were wrong about me. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. I'm not worthless. I'm not garbage. I'm not something to be thrown away. She looked up at Cale, and the expression on his face, pride and wonder, and something fierce and protective, gave her the courage to finish. I'm his mate, and I'm staying. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Cale moved. He didn't touch her uncle, didn't need to. He simply stepped forward, and the sheer force of his presence drove Marcus back toward the door. You heard her, Cale said quietly. She's made her choice. Now you're going to leave my castle, return to your territory, and never contact her again. If I hear that you've so much as spoken her name, I will consider it an act of war. Am I understood? Marcus's face was mottled with fury, but he wasn't stupid enough to argue with a Lycan king in his own castle. He shot one last venomous look at Ilara, then turned and strode out, his men scrambling to follow. Lord Varen lingered a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then he bowed to Cale and disappeared through the door. And then they were alone. Ilara's legs gave out. Kyle caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her and pulling her against his chest. She buried her face in his shirt and shook, not crying, not quite, but trembling with the aftermath of everything she'd just done. You were magnificent, he murmured against her hair. Absolutely magnificent. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. His arms tightened around her. It's choosing to act despite it. And you chose, Ilara. You chose yourself. You chose us. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. His golden eyes were soft now, the deadly king replaced by the man who knelt beside her bed and kissed her knuckles and promised to wait forever. I choose you, she whispered. I choose this. I choose us. Something broke in his expression, a dam crumbling, control finally slipping. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't patient. It was 300 years of waiting crashing into her all at once, his mouth claiming hers with a desperation that stole her breath and set her blood on fire. She kissed him back with everything she had, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body arching into his. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Mine," he growled against her lips. "You're mine, Ilara." "Yours," she agreed, "and you're mine." His smile was fierce and tender and full of promise. Always. The bonding ceremony took place 3 weeks later. Ilara stood before the mirror in her chambers, barely recognizing the woman who stared back at her. The white gown was simple but exquisite, flowing silk that caught the light like liquid moonlight, with delicate silver embroidery along the bodice. Her dark hair had been woven with tiny white flowers, and her skin glowed with health she hadn't possessed a month ago. She looked like a queen. She felt like an imposter. A knock at the door made her turn. "Come in." Mira, the older servant who had become something like a friend over the past weeks, entered with a knowing smile. "The king sent me to check on you. He's pacing holes in the throne room floor." Despite her nerves, Ilara laughed. The sound still surprised her sometimes. How easily it came now. How natural it felt to smile and mean it. "Tell him I'm almost ready." "I'll tell him you're worth waiting for." Mira's eyes softened. "He's a lucky man, our king. I've served this court for 40 years, and I've never seen him like this. You've changed him." "He's changed me more." It was true. The woman who had arrived at this castle 3 weeks ago, broken, starving, expecting cruelty, felt like a distant memory. She still had nightmares sometimes. She still flinched at raised voices and struggled to believe she deserved good things. Healing wasn't linear, and scars didn't disappear overnight. But she was learning. Every day, with Kale's patience and kindness, she was learning that she was worthy of love. Mira left, and Ilara took one last look in the mirror. "You're not worthless," she told her reflection. "You're not garbage. You're not something to be thrown away." She believed it now. Most of the time, anyway. That would have to be enough. The throne room was transformed. Hundreds of candles cast warm golden light across the stone walls. White flowers cascaded from every surface, their sweet scent filling the air. And filling the room were representatives from every pack in the realm. Nobles, alphas, warriors, all gathered to witness their king take a mate. But Ilara barely saw any of it. She only saw Kale. He stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in black and silver, looking every inch the legendary Lycan king. But his eyes, those golden eyes that had seen centuries of war and loss and waiting, were fixed on her with an expression that made her heart stop. Wonder, reverence, love. He looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered in the dark. She walked toward him on unsteady legs, acutely aware of every gaze in the room. Somewhere in the crowd, she knew, were representatives from the Thornwood pack. Her uncle hadn't dared come himself, not after Kale's threat, but he'd sent witnesses. Good. Let them see. Let them report back to Marcus exactly what his worthless niece had become. When she reached Kyle, he took her hands in his. His palms were warm, his grip steady, anchoring her to the moment. "You're beautiful," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "You take my breath away." "You're not so bad yourself." His lips twitched. "Nervous?" Terrified? Me too. At her surprised look, he squeezed her hands. I've waited 300 years for this moment. I'm allowed to be terrified that I'll somehow ruin it. The ceremony was ancient, words spoken in the old tongue, vows exchanged under the light of the full moon streaming through the windows above. Ilara repeated the phrases she'd been taught, feeling the weight of each word settle into her bones. I choose you as my mate, my partner, my equal. I bind my life to yours, my heart to yours, my soul to yours. In this life and whatever comes after, I am yours. When she finished, Kale's eyes were bright with emotion. I have waited 3 centuries, he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall, for someone who would see past the crown and the power and the legend, someone who would know the man underneath, someone who would choose me not because I am king, but despite it. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles just as he had that first night in her chambers. Ilara, you are everything I never dared hope for. You walked into my court expecting cruelty, and instead you found your home. You thought you were worthless, and I will spend every day of my very long life proving to you just how wrong you were. His golden eyes held hers, fierce and tender and absolutely certain. I love you. I will love you until the stars burn out and the mountains crumble to dust. And I will never, ever let you forget how precious you are. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. I love you too, she whispered. I didn't know I was capable of feeling this much. I didn't know anything could feel this good. He kissed her then, in front of the entire court, sealing their bond with a tenderness that made her soul ache. When they parted, the hall erupted in cheers. She was his queen now. She was home. 1 year later. Ilara stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the sun set over the mountains. Below, the castle bustled with activity. Servants preparing for the evening feast, guards changing shifts, children playing in the courtyard. Her children would play there someday. The thought still amazed her. Arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into Kale's chest. You're thinking loud thoughts, he murmured against her hair. I can practically hear them. Good thoughts. She turned in his arms, resting her hands on his chest. I was thinking about how different everything is. A year ago, I was locked in a cellar, wondering if I'd survive the winter. Now I'm a queen, he finished, beloved by her people, cherished by her mate, thriving. It still doesn't feel real sometimes. I know. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. But it is. Every bit of it. She'd received word last month that her uncle's territory was failing. Crops withered, alliances crumbled, debts mounted. The pack that had thrown her away like garbage was slowly collapsing under the weight of its own cruelty. She hadn't gloated. She hadn't needed to. The best revenge, she'd learned, was simply living well. Any regrets? Kale asked, his golden eyes searching her face. Ilara thought about the girl who had knelt on cold stone, expecting pain. She thought about the woman who had stood up to her uncle and claimed her own worth. She thought about everything she'd survived and everything she'd gained. Not a single one. He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his hard features into something breathtakingly beautiful, and pulled her closer. Neither do I. As the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ilara finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a place, but a person. Not a castle, but a heart that beat in time with hers. She had been broken once, discarded, told she was nothing. Now she was everything, and she would never let anyone make her forget it again. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Until next time.